Mr. Chancellor, Madam Vice Chancellor, fellow faculty members, graduates, parents, and guests, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's honorary degree recipient. Last Friday morning, Peter Mansbridge was in Courcelles-sur-Mer on Juno Beach for the 70th anniversary of D-Day. Just before he left for France, he was in Hamilton, Ontario, flying in one of the world's 2 remaining operational Lancaster bombers, and telling the story of the people, including his father, who flew them. The day after D-Day, the day after the D-Day commemoration in northern France, he was also in northern France, going through into trenches where no one has been for decades. You'll see some of those images later this year as part of the CBC's commemoration of the centenary of the start of the First World War. That's all in less than 2 weeks in a journalistic career spanning more than 40 years. During the last 25 as chief correspondent for CBC News and anchor of The National, Peter Mansbridge has been at the scene and taken all of us with him to many of the most important events which have shaped Canada and the world. In that time, he's won 12 Gemini Awards for excellence in broadcast journalism, and in 2008 was made an Officer of the Order of Canada. Many of you know that Peter was offered a CBC Radio job in 1968 by a network manager who heard him announcing flight departures at an airport in Churchill, Manitoba, where he was working primarily as a baggage handler after attending, but not graduating, from Glebe Collegiate in Ottawa, followed by a brief stint in the Navy. From his start in radio, he switched to television in 1972 and became the national correspondent in Saskatchewan in 1975. Then he went on to the Parliamentary Bureau in Ottawa a year later, and to Toronto in the mid-1980s, where he became chief correspondent and anchor of The National in 1988. In those 2 jobs, he plays several roles, not all of them of his own choice. Inside CBC News, he's the journalistic leader with a first-rate reporter's instinct of what makes a great story, actively shaping what goes on The National every night, and always pushing reporters to take their stories beyond the obvious. I know that from personal experience, having worked with Peter for a decade. Producing live news specials with Peter as host was easy. No matter what technical or editorial challenges and chaos was happening behind the scenes, none of that would ever show up on the air. Where Peter was masterfully prepared, calm and confident, able to take in stride whatever curves we threw at him, although we might hear about it after the program was over and we were off the air. In the almost 2 decades during which public broadcasting in Canada has been under both verbal and financial assault by a succession of governments and others, he's also become the lightning rod for many of the CBC's real or perceived faults. In a world where, as someone once said, many Canadians believe they have 2 jobs, their own and president of the CBC. He's handled these roles with diplomacy and grace, regularly explaining to audiences across the country, including to a packed lecture hall of first-year journalism students at Carleton in April, the vital role both public broadcasting and journalism more broadly must continue to play in exploring and explaining the complications of our world. It's an even more important task today, as journalism is in upheaval and the future of public broadcasting is far from certain. Millions of Canadians know Peter Mansbridge primarily as our interpreter. In a world where social media gets lots of attention, Canadians still head to the mainstream media to find out the details when they hear that something important has happened. They want to understand what is occurring around them, and they look for someone they can trust, someone with knowledge and experience gathered from being on the ground and reporting what he sees and hears. They look for context and a sense of history and perspective, as well as someone who will ask the tough questions, raise the uncomfortable truths, put things in perspective, and do it all in a fair way that leaves Canadians with a better understanding of what has happened, what we still don't know about an issue, and a sense of where things may go next. Last week he was in France. Most nights, though, he's from a studio in Toronto, connecting with us in our homes, walking us through what happened that day and why we need to care about it. Over his career, he has helped Canadians comprehend countless triumphs and tragedies, election nights to Olympics, from the fall of the Berlin Wall and the ongoing reshaping of our world to the future of Canada's North, and much, much more than is possible to enumerate this morning. Mr. Chancellor, in recognition of a distinguished career as an award-winning journalist, contributing significantly to Canadian culture, I request that you confer the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, upon Peter Mansbridge.
By virtue of authority vested in me by the Board of Governors, and upon recommendation of the University Senate, I confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa. Congratulations.
Dr. Mansbridge. I like that. Could use that on the air, I think. They could introduce the program that way, don't you think? Mr. Chancellor, Board Chair, Madam President, honored guests, family, friends, and the stars of the show, the soon-to-be graduates. I love these kind of days. As Chancellor of Mount Allison, I get the opportunity to be at a convocation a couple of times a year. And I always find it so remarkably heartwarming. You have the soon-to-be graduates surrounded by the people who are so important to them. Number one, their families and their close friends, who are so proud on this day, beaming with pride. They've got their classmates who they've become such close friends with over these past years. And you've got those who've been trying to impart you with the kind of knowledge you're going to need in the years ahead. It's a special day. As Chancellor, you get to see each student in that incredible moment when they have just received their degrees. You feel all kinds of different emotions with them. Some graduates are, really buzzed. They're very excited. They're happy. They're laughing. I've had students take selfies with me at the moment of being hooded. You have some who are incredibly emotional to the point of tears. They know how hard they've worked to get to this moment. And in every year for me, there's always something that's different. And this year at Mount Allison, I was getting near the end of what had been a long day. And this young woman crossed the stage, was in front of me, said the magic words to make it all official. She was hooded. We talked for a moment about her family who was there and who were calling out from the audience. And then we shook hands, and suddenly I could feel in my hand that she was passing me something. So I was puzzled, and I looked at her kind of puzzled, and I said, "What is that? It feels like a memory stick." And she said, "Yes." And I said, "What's on it?" And she just smiled. And I thought, I don't know whether I want this memory stick. And then she said, "It's my resume." I thought that was great. That took a lot of initiative. Let me assure you of something right away. I'm truly humbled that Carleton University considered me worthy of an honorary degree. But I'm doubly honored that I get to share this experience with all of you who got here the hard way. Today's a major accomplishment for you. Don't let anyone understate what you have done here. It's something you can carry proudly for the rest of your lives. Now, the generous introduction I received from my longtime friend Chris Waddell recounted some of my accomplishments. You had to listen closely, or you might have missed it, because he also mentioned that graduating was not one of those accomplishments. Unlike each and every one of you, I cannot count a university degree as one of my achievements. I'm not sure if any of you know this, but I went to school, high school, just down the street at Glebe Collegiate. And like many of my friends, I used to sit in class dreaming about one day going to Carleton. And that was the problem. I spent a lot of time dreaming when I was at Glebe. As a result, for a lot of different reasons, I never got here. My marks weren't good enough was probably the main reason. But that dream of higher education, of being a Carleton grad, that dream never left. And almost half a century later, here I am. So without question, this day is very special for me. You know, my generation had lots of challenges, but everything is relative. Back then, you could almost get by with simply being at the right place at the right time. I certainly did. Chris's story is right. I was a baggage handler, loaded gas on aircraft, sold tickets, checked in passengers at a tiny little airport in Churchill, Manitoba. And one day, they asked me to announce the flight on the PA system. And I did. The next thing I knew, I had a guy in front of me offering me a job at the local CBC Northern service station. That's how I started. I know that's tough if you're sitting here today getting a journalism degree and said, it just simply isn't fair, is it? Now, it's unlikely that that could ever happen again. It's not impossible, but let's face it, it is unlikely. And it's partly why you're here, why you spent all these years working so hard to get to this day. To get your degree and have someone like me try to impart a little life lesson just before you do. My favorite story about a convocation address is about a person who some of you probably have never heard of. His name was Lorne Greene. Your parents would remember him, certainly your grandparents would. He was a CBC Radio announcer during the Second World War. He had a fantastic voice. That voice was called the voice of doom because of the news that he so often had to tell Canadians about, especially in the early years of the war. Well, after the war, Lorne Greene left Canada. His true dream was to become an actor. And he moved to Southern California and to Hollywood, and he became a very successful actor. And he starred in the 1960s in a Western called Bonanza. They all lived on this farm called the Ponderosa. It was extremely popular. Well, as a result, some little university in Kingston, I can't remember the name of it, gave him an honorary degree. So he came up to Kingston at Convocation to give the convocation address and had been told, you know, give them something to think about, give them some advice as they leave university. So after the ceremony like that, Lorne Greene went up to the microphone and he looked out at the audience and he said, buy a good bed. You're going to spend a third of the rest of your life in it. And then he sat down. Now, a good bed is good advice, but let me try to do a little more than just a good bed. Back to this issue of generational challenges. In reality, no generation has had an easy path to success, and you won't either. You'll have to be smarter, you'll have to be more flexible, you'll have to be willing to change jobs, change employers, change your skill set. But you've heard all that before, probably too many times already. Frankly, in a rapidly changing world, I can barely imagine what the future will look like. But I do know this. I know that you are up to the challenge that your generation is facing. Because you know what? We Canadians have always been up to the challenge. Think of this. 100 years ago, right now, the 1914 graduating classes of Canadian universities across the country were about to face a world war. Then they went through the Great Depression, and after that, another world war. In fact, the young graduates of 70 years ago, men and women who should have been sitting like you are right now, would face challenges we can't imagine. As Chris mentioned, I was with some of them just last week in France, commemorating D-Day 70 years later. They're old now, men and women who, when they were your age, when they should have been in school, were fighting a war. Tens of thousands never came home. Hundreds of thousands came home wounded. Talk about a generation who faced challenges. And yet through all that, and after all that, they managed to build the country that we're all so lucky to live in today. So in spite of the challenges that you face, and you do face many, let's keep things in perspective. This is not a day for cynicism. It's not a day for pessimism. In fact, those attitudes are rarely helpful. So take the opposite approach. You are special, every one of you. You are adults who will be asked to lead us, to make decisions for us. Each one of you has not only the opportunity to contribute to our society, but you have the responsibility to contribute. Whatever you end up doing, you will also have the opportunity for public service. And that public service could come in many forms. It may be as simple as voting. In fact, the least you can do is vote. Take what you've learned at Carleton. Make our country, make our world better. The great Canadian inventor Alexander Graham Bell once said something that I think is worth repeating. He actually said a lot of things that were worth repeating, but let me mention one, because it captures a circumstance that we all face from time to time, and that you will face more often as you take on greater responsibilities. This is what he said. When one door closes, another door opens. But we tend to look so long and so regretfully at the closed door that we don't see the one that's open for us. So follow your heart, follow your instinct, know what you believe in, and work for it. Don't let anyone or anything stop you. Look at the open door, not the closed one. And remember, what you do will influence others. Courage is contagious. So when you walk out of Carleton today, some of you for the last time, you'll be following in the footsteps of those who walked the same path before you. They helped build a better Canada. So can you. So will you. The accomplishments of some of you in the class of 2014 will be written in our history books. We, all of us, those behind you, those in front of you, we have faith in every one of you, faith in your ability, faith in your character. You will be a force for good. Congratulations. Enjoy the day. It's yours. And thank you for letting me be a part of it. Thank you.